Hello everyone. Thank you for being here today. I am going to discuss questions and answers on literary criticism, which might be possible questions for the board licensure examination for professional teachers. So first, let me share to you some strategies in test taking. So these are already mentioned by our other speakers while reviewing questions, but I am going to repeat them. Remember the laws of Thorndike, the law of exercise, that when things are most often repeated, they are best remembered. So ulitin natin. So these are the test-taking strategies which I'm going to share again. So you have to read the test questions carefully and work as rapidly as you can without being careless. Do not waste time pondering on individual questions and you find extremely difficult or unfamiliar. So first, answer the questions which you feel confident, then go back and answer questions that require more thought, and then conclude with the most difficult questions. Remember, you are working within the allotted time. So, analyze the questions, analyze the choices. Laging tatandaan yan. So, the questions which I am going to share are based on the 14 literary theories and approaches. And there are also basic questions here. So, the literary theories and approaches which I'm going to discuss will be based on new criticism or formalism, structuralism, deconstructionism, new historicism, biographical criticism, post-colonial criticism, reader response criticism, moral and philosophical criticism, psychoanalytic criticism, archetypal or mythological criticism, feminism, gynocriticism, gender criticism, and Marxism. So, nalula na ba kayo sa mga ism? So, let us take them one by one based on the questions which you have answered on your pre-test. So, here are the general questions that you might encounter in the BLEP. In studying text, which of the following provides general guidelines to help the audience analyze, deconstruct, and interpret and evaluate? A. Deconstructionism. B. Archetypes. C. Literary criticism. And D. Literary approaches. You are correct if you had chosen letter D. We are looking for literary approaches because these are the general guidelines. So you know the meaning of literary criticism, that it is to study, to analyze, to interpret, and evaluate a work of art. Here we are looking for the guidelines. That's why our answer is letter D. Second question, how does literary theory resemble the practice of philosophy? So it was developed by Plato and Aristotle. A. Literary theory relies totally on speculation rather than history. Literary theory engages with theoretical rather than real-world issues. C. Literary theory asks fundamental questions about literary interpretation and at the same time builds specific systems of literary interpretation. And D. Literary theory is detached from the reality of politics and the economy. Here we are looking on the resemblance of theory and philosophy, which was developed by Plato and Aristotle. So the answer is letter C. You are asking fundamental questions about literary interpretation. Remember, if it is your first time to critique a work of art and if you ask questions, you are actually doing literary analysis. Another question, what is the main function of literary theory? So we are looking at the main function, that's the clue here. Is it A, to evaluate the role of historical content in the interpretation of literature, which is actually for new historicism? Is it B, to understand the role of sexuality, gender, race, and ethnicity in literary study, which is about gender criticism? Then C, to understand the importance of the formal elements of literary structure, which is formalism and new criticism, and D, to formulate relationships among an author, a reader, and a literary work, which is actually reader response. So what's the main function of literary theory? Actually, the answer is all of the above because this follows all functions of literary theories. Next, which of the following best describes the difference between literary criticism and literary theory? So the clues here are the difference between literary criticism and literary theory. That's why you have here the definition, literary theory and literary criticism. So you have to look for the best answer. So it's long, so I'm not going to read it anymore. So let's see the correct answer. It's letter A. Literary theory is concerned with the method used to interpret a work, while literary criticism is the application of the literary theory. So always remember that. Next question, which theorist is associated with the idea that art is a copy of a copy? Is it A. Jacques Derrida, B. Jacques Lacan, C. Plato, and D. Aristotle? If you know these persons, this will be easy for you. The answer here is letter C. According to Plato, the art is a copy of a copy which is similar to art as an imitation or mimesis. Let us be familiar with the different persons presented here. Jacques Derrida's concept of difference challenges us to think about language as a system that involves a constant process of deferred meaning. For example, in his book Grammatology, he argues that literature has no fixed or stable meaning. Meaning, literature's meaning changes depending on the reader. So it depends on the reader, how they perceive the meaning of the text. Now, who is Jacques Lacan? Jacques Lacan, the mirror stage is the point at which a child is able to separate the I from the other. So in the mirror stage, Lacan argues that as infants, human beings begin to define their identities against the identities of others. So Jacques Lacan is a psychologist. Aristotle is the famous student of Plato who conceptualized liberal humanism, which is an idea associated with the Renaissance. And then this is the answer. Imitation or mimesis, or it is an art. An art is a copy of a copy. Next question, which of the following figures is considered to be the father of the linguistic theory known as structuralism? So you have to be familiar with Ferdinand de Saussure, who is the father of modern linguistics. So you know that Karl Marx is the author of Das Kapital, which is about Marxism. That's why the word or the surname Marx. Clint Brooks is a new critic or an advocate of new criticism. And Sigmund Freud is the father of psychoanalytic theory. Another question, which school of literary theory shows a particular interest in the role of testimony in literature? So from psychoanalysis, we have this particular theory, which is actually what we call the trauma theory. So let's be familiar with this different theories that are mentioned here. Eco-theory is a literary theory that most directly explores questions of the role of spatial setting in a poem. So that means eco-theories show an interest on how writers conceptualize natural environments and the representation of environmental issues in literature and culture. In chaos theory, it has a concept of strange attraction. So these are mysterious forces that are both random and determined. And Marxist theory is about class struggle. So this is the between proletariat and the bourgeoisie. And trauma theory is tremendously influenced by psychoanalysis, and it was developed out of the work of Sigmund Freud. A testifying subject needs a witness to deliver a successful testimony. Another question, intertextuality believes that A, accurate meaning can be achieved through close reading of the text itself. B, heteroglossia or multiple meaning exists, nor can accurate or valid interpretation be possible. C, heteroglossia or multiple meaning exist. And D, Meaning is the sole responsibility of the author, therefore interpretation shows be aligned with what the author meant in the text. Here we are only looking about the belief about intertextuality. So what is intertextuality? So you are correct. It is about multiple meanings. Then which term is borrowed from art criticism and applied to a kind of fiction that mixes realism with flights of myths and fantasy? It is associated with Latin American writers such as Gabriel Garcia Marquez. A. Metaphor. B. Mask. C. Magic realism. And D. In medias res. So you know what a metaphor is. It's a comparison. Then you know what is a mask, or mask is an aristocratic theatrical entertainment with elaborate costumes and sets in which a brief poetic drama provides the vehicle for music, song, and dance. And medias res is the practice of opening a story in the middle of an action. So what's the answer now? So obviously it is magic realism. So it is a literary or artistic genre in which realistic narrative and naturalistic technique are combined with surreal elements of dream or fantasy. So for example, may mga lumilipad, superhero, or you have some images of supernatural which is only existing in a dream or fantasy. Next question, what is the central idea of Ferdinand de Saussure's course in general linguistics? If you hadn't read the book, I'm just going to give you an idea. So what's the central idea of this book? So this is about language, which can be analyzed as a formal system of elements. So remember that Ferdinand de Saussure is a Swiss professor and linguist of the late 19th and early 20th century and is considered as the father of modern linguistics. The philologist actually has this approach, which is diachronic approach, wherein the languages are studied from point of view of their historical development. For example, the changes which have taken place between Old and Modern English could be described in phonological, grammatical, and semantic terms. But Ferdinand de Saussure added that languages can be studied at a thematic point in time. So one describes a state of language disregarding whatever changes might be taking place. Synchronic. So remember the lang and the parole. So that's the idea on that. So the social context, the meaning of the words depending on the social context. Another question, which of the following is not a process or principle of formalistic criticism? Our clue here is the word not. Remember that. So except so everything are correct except this one. So for example, A, the dominant quality and literary device shape the nature and form of literature. B, meaning is the essence of literature. C, the familiarization creates a literary experience. And D, close reading, non-intertextual interpretation are approaches in the study of literary text. So which of the following is not a process or principle? So it's letter B, because A, C, and D are principles of the formalistic criticism or new criticism. If you don't know the meaning of defamiliarization, this is a term that describes how literature exposes its own artificiality. And it is a concept associated with the Russian formalist explored by Viktor Skolovsky. So it is still a part of new criticism or formalism. Next question, buhay pa ba ang mga teachers natin? What genre did the new critics most enjoy analyzing? So wala nang question, but the answer here is poetry. So they enjoy poetry because this is the purest exemplification of the literary values which they upheld. Next question, what do structuralist and formalist critics have in common? So we are looking at the commonality between structuralist and formalist critics. So which of this should be the correct answer? It is all of the above. Both of them reject the importance of historical context. Both of them look for an objective way to view text. Both of them focus on evaluating literature in a scientific manner. Another question, which of the following descriptions best defines the literary theory known as formalism? Is it A, an approach that emphasizes the historical context of a text? B, an approach that emphasizes the biographical intent of a text? C, an approach that emphasizes literary devices in a text? Or D, an approach that emphasizes the representation of the economy in a text? So the answer is letter C. It emphasizes literary devices in the text. So we are looking on the figures of speech because letter A is about new historicism, letter B is a fallacy because new historicism also you are looking at the biographical intent of the text, and letter D is for Marxism. That's why our correct choice is letter C. So the new critics avoid these fallacies. Another one is the hearsay of paraphrase. So you do not paraphrase the poem because the essence will be lost. So avoid affective fallacy and intentional fallacy. Intentional fallacy is the mistaken belief that the author's intention is the same as the text meaning, and affective fallacy is the error of judging a text on its emotional effects on the reader. So we do not put our own feelings into the text when we are analyzing a text. That's why these fallacies are a big no-no to the new critics. Next question, which school of literary theory is associated with the phrase to make the stone stonier? Is it about formalism, structuralism, post-structuralism, or Marxism? The answer is letter A. It is formalism because you are studying the text and the text alone. So it is just like a fossil shell that you have to get its meaning. Next question, all are characteristics of new criticism except. So there's one here which is not a characteristics of new criticism. And what is that? So the answer is letter B. It is concerned with the social content of literary works because this is about Marxism. If it is an art for art's sake, it is new criticism or formalism. Close reading is new criticism or formalism. The same with analyzing the text itself. It's about new criticism. Which of the following approaches investigates the underlying patterns of the different texts that people read? A. Formalism, B. Structuralism, C. Psychological criticism, and D. Biographical criticism. So what's the answer now? The answer is structuralism. So here we are looking on the origin of structuralism, which is by Russian formalists Viktor Shklovsky, Jan Muravsky, and Trubetskoy, and the linguistics of Ferdinand de Saussure. The Anglo-American new critics Eliot, Richards, Wimsatt, Brooks used psychological approach which concentrated on the reader's response to a text, and they analyze the text as an object whose meaning can be interpreted in terms of the symbolic patterns, or what we call semiotics. So you have to be familiar with these people also. So once you encounter them, you know where they belong. So these are new critics. There are 3 dimensions to a structuralist approach. One is naturalization of a text as a particular system or structure in itself. Number 2 is binary oppositions. Text is related to a culture. And 3, intertextuality. Texts are unavoidably influenced by other texts. Remember this word intertextuality or heteroglossia? Another question here, which of the following is a rule of semiotics? A. All linguistic concepts evolved solely out of the responses of people within a specific historical era. B. All linguistic and social phenomena are texts, and the object of studying this text is to reveal the underlying codes that make them meaningful. C. All linguistics is in some way related to class struggle. And D. All linguistics is related to history, and therefore the meaning of linguistics relies exclusively on historical context. So we have here some clues. Letter A, for example, we are talking about specific historical era. So this is new historicism. Then letter C, class struggle. So this is Marxism. And letter D, historical context of the linguistics. So that is diachronic. So our answer actually is letter B. We are looking at the underlying codes to reveal the meaning of the text. So that is semiotics. Semiotics is the study of signs and symbols and their use or interpretation. It was proposed in America by Charles Sanders Peirce, and semiotics borrowed linguistic methods utilized by Ferdinand de Saussure, the father of modern linguistics, and then they applied them to all meaningful cultural phenomena. And semiotics and structuralism are terms that can be used interchangeably. So do not be confused, but the difference is that semiotics is a particular field of study and structuralism is more of an approach. Buhay pa. Another question. Which of the following approaches rejects the traditional assumption that language can accurately represent reality? A. New criticism. B. Biographical criticism. C. Mythological criticism. And D. Deconstructionism. So what's your answer? Yes, you are correct. It's deconstructionism. Remember that deconstructionists believe that language is fundamentally unstable medium. Literary texts which are made up of words have no fixed single meaning. Another question, in his essay The Death of the Author, Ronald Barthes argues what about literature? You don't know Ronald Barthes? So let's make an intelligent guess here. If you don't know him and you do not know the essay The Death of the Author. So you are looking at the word death. So is it A, biographical information about the author must be considered when evaluating literature? B, a text and its author are unrelated. C, it is possible to distill meaning from a work based on the author's politics. And D, authorial intent must be considered when evaluating literature. So your intelligent guess is correct. You don't know the content, but you know the idea. So it's the text and the author are unrelated. So let's see the story about this. Ronald Barthes and Michael Foucault have called for the death of the author. So it's the rejection of the assumption that the author, no matter how ingenious, can fully control the meaning of the text. They have also announced the death of literature as a special category of writing. According to them, poems and novels are merely words on a page that deserve no privileges, status as art. All texts are created equal, but they are equally untrustworthy. Another question, ultimately, the literary theory of deconstruction argues that the meaning of the text always relies on context. B, texts are always heterogeneous. C, the instability of a text is actually evident in the text itself. And D, all of the above. What's the answer now? It's all of the above. In deconstruction, we need A, B, and C. We have here another question. Which of the following statements best explains the main objective of new historicism? A, texts are examined to see how the formal aspects of the text create meaning. B, texts are examined to see how colonizers and the colonized interact. C, texts are examined to determine how they reveal social realities. And D, texts are examined to determine the author's intent. So here, letter A is new criticism. B is about post-colonial criticism because you have colonizers and the colonized. And D, it's about psychoanalysis. So it's right, it's letter C. So they reveal social realities if you are talking about new historicism. Another information, when you talk about post-colonial criticism, it's the work of Edward Said, which is entitled Orientalism, and his concept of the Orient is that it was produced by Western scholarship. The West views post-colonial critics through its own limited historical position. So the main function of post-colonial criticism is to represent the relationship between colonizers and the colonized. But here, the answer, of course, is letter C because we are revealing the social realities, which is the main objective of new historicism. Next question, how does new historicism differ from traditional historicism? Okay, so your answer is correct. All of the above. New historicism does not make strict delineations between literary and non-literary texts. New historicism takes a particular interest in marginalized peoples. And C, new historicism is interested in how texts help us understand economic realities. Let's go to another question. Which of the following represents the philosophical belief of a new historicism scholar? A, it does not allow internal reading. B, history exists as the only accurate text of the post-structuralism. C, it examines how readers are influenced by their prejudice or personal view of the world. D, there is no history but a version of the author's view of the historical facts. So what's the belief of the new historicism scholar? So the belief is there is no history but a version of the author's view of the historical facts. Because new historian presents who a literary selection is influenced by the writer's milieu, or the epoch or the time. The online library of Purdue University reports that new historics do not believe that we can look at history objectively, but rather we interpret events as products of our time and culture, and that we don't have clear access to any but the most basic facts of history. Our understanding of what such facts means is strictly a matter of interpretation. It's not fact. So that's their contention. Next question. Which of the following exemplifies new historicism? A theory that sees history as a form of writing and discourse. B, a theory that regards history as a series of narratives. C, a theory that capitalizes on the interplay between literature and history. And D, all of the above. So we are talking about the ways of the new historicists. So the answer is letter D. Do you know who coined the term new historicism? So another info, it is coined by Stephen Greenblatt. So it might be asked, which historical approach places the text as parallel to the relevant experiences of the author when the text was written? A, sociological criticism. B, biographical. C, psychological. And D, new historicism. So it's biographical criticism. It's about the experiences of the author when the text was written. So biographical criticism, real-life experience can help shape either directly or indirectly an author's work. Understanding an author's life can help us better understand the work. And facts from the author's life are used to help the reader better understand the work. And the focus is always on the literary work under investigation. Next question, which literary approach investigates whether the writer challenges or supports the values of his or her contemporaries? So since we are talking about biographical criticism, so the answer is letter B. And these are the common questions about biographical criticism. O, pwede nang picturean. Picturean nyo na so that we will not read this anymore. Then just review. Next question. The following are post-colonial critical approach except A. It studies the impact of colonial culture through literature. B. It recognizes how history shaped the lives and belief of people of a former colony. C. It pushes for the appreciation of the literary creativity of the postmodern era. And D. It analyzes how a superior culture influenced an inferior community. So what's the answer now? Okay, so we are looking at the approaches except an approach which do not belong on post-colonial criticism. And it is letter C because letter C is for postmodernism. Postmodern criticism is used to refer to the culture of advanced capitalist societies. It is a paradigm shift in the cultural, social, and economic orders. So the term has been applied to a style or a sensibility manifesting itself in any creative endeavor which exhibits some elements of self-consciousness and reflectivity. Philippine literature was shaped by the different colonizers. Because of this, their influences are evident in the text that we read today. Which approach is most appropriate to use? A. Formalism, B. Psychological criticism, C. Post-colonial criticism, and D. New historicism. Colonizers, influences of the colonizer, so we are looking for post-colonial criticism. So information, again, post-colonialism is a critical analysis of the history, culture, literature, and modes of discourse on the third world countries in Africa, Asia, the Caribbean islands, and America, and Philippines belong here. Then post-colonial criticism concerns itself with the study of the colonization, which began as early as the Renaissance period, the decolonization, which involves winning back and reconstituting the native cultures, and the neo-colonizing process, which is an aftermath of postmodernism and late capitalism when multinational corporations control the world. So that's postmodernism, the neo-colonizing process. And post-colonialism analyzes the metaphysical, ethical, and political concerns about cultural identity, gender, nationality, race, ethnicity, subjectivity, language, and power. Next question, which of the following approaches shows that there is a dynamic interaction between the text and the reader? So you know Rosenblatt, it's actually the reader response criticism. It's the text, the context, and the reader. Another question, which of the following approaches looks into what the work says about the nature of good and evil? A. Philosophical criticism, B. Deconstructionism, C. Biographical criticism, and D. Mythological criticism. So what's your answer? Yes, you are correct. If it is about the nature of good and evil, we are looking at the philosophical criticism. So moral philosophical critics believe that the larger purpose of literature is to teach morality and to probe philosophical issues. So the list of practitioners here are Matthew Arnold, Plato, and Horace. Arnold argued that works must have high seriousness. Plato insisted that literature must exhibit moralism and utilitarianism. And Horace felt the literature should be delightful and instructive. Another question. Which of the following questions is used for philosophical approach in literary criticism? A. How is the work's structure unified? B. According to this work's view of life, what is mankind's relationship with God? C. What is the effect of the plot and what parts specifically produce that effect? And D. What do the characters' emotions and behaviors reveal about their psychological states? So, what's your answer? Okay, so A is new criticism, C is new criticism also, and D is psychological criticism. So the correct answer is letter B. So these are the common questions. Again, pwedeng screenshot. Picturean nyo na. Okay, tapos na siguro. So let's go to another question. Which of the following relates psychoanalytic theory in literary criticism? A. Art is decadent and self-indulging. B. Literary criticism is giving judgment of the behavior and prejudice of readers during the reading act. C. The literary text is the product of the author's repressed dreams and fantasies and literary interpretation or psychoanalysis. And D. The text is a rich symbol of the author's personal and psychological view of the world and its people. So the correct answer here is letter C. Psychoanalytic theory views literature as a form of manifesting the repressed wishes and fantasies of the author. It argues that literary texts like dreams express the secret unconscious desire and anxieties of the author. That a literary work is a manifestation of the author's own neurosis. Another question, what fundamental idea does psychoanalytic criticism hold about literary texts? A. Literary text should not be read as a projection of the author's psyche. B. Literary texts reveal secret elements of an author's unconscious. C. Literary texts solely reflect an author's intention. And D. Literary texts are unlike dreams because they have a system of order and produce meaning. So what's your answer? It is letter B. It reveals secret elements of an author's unconscious. Okay, so we have here names to remember. Sigmund Freud, who provided the foundation for psychoanalytic criticism. So he said that all artists are neurotic. Carl Jung, on 3 parts of the psyche, the conscious, personal unconscious, and collective unconscious. And then Northrop Frye on archetypes, that literature comprises one complete and whole story called the monomyth. And Jacques Lacan focused on dreams. Like language, dreams are structured and therefore can be scientifically analyzed. So remember these people in psychoanalytic criticism. So basahin nyo ng basahin para matandaan. Next, which of the following approaches makes use of the different theories that are proposed by behavioral sciences? A. Formalism. B. Structuralism. C. Psychological criticism. And D. Biographical criticism. Okay, so the answer is letter C. Psychological criticism. So they are similar. You say psychoanalysis, psychoanalytic criticism, psychological criticism. Next, which literary approach centers on the character's motivations, behavior, and actions? A. Gender criticism. B. Reader response criticism. C. Psychological. And D. Biographical. So it's letter C. It is psychological criticism because it centers on the character's motivations, behavior, and action. Another question, which of the following questions is asked when a psychological approach is applied in literary criticism? So we need now the application of the psychological approach. So what is the question that we should be asking? A. What figures of speech are used? B. Which behaviors of the characters are conscious ones? C. How accurately does the story depict the time in which it is set? And D. How do economic conditions determine the direction of the characters' lives? So we are discussing a lot, and I think you are familiar now with what we are talking about. So if it is about figures of speech, it is new criticism or formalism. And with if it is about the story which depict the time in which it is set, it is historical approach. And D, it's about Marxism or feminism. So the correct answer here is letter D. Which behaviors of the characters are conscious ones? Which of the following human behaviors is important to a Freudian psychoanalytic study of William Shakespeare's Hamlet? A. Neurotic behavior. B. Changes in emotional states. C. Obsessions. D. Slips of the tongue. And E. All of the above. I had given E. All of the above because you need A, B, C, and D when you use the psychoanalytic criticism in William Shakespeare's Hamlet. Next, which literary approach includes archetypes as its key concept? A. Formalism. B. Deconstructionism. C. Biographical criticism. And D. Mythological criticism. The answer is letter. Yes, you are correct. It is mythological criticism. So in mythological criticism or archetypal approach, it assumes that there is a collection of symbols, images, characters, and motifs. So these are what we call archetypes. And that evokes basically the same response in all people. So we have here the 12 Jungian archetypes, the archetypes for writers. Remember Carl Jung, a psychoanalytic theorist. So we are familiar when we say that if you are an explorer, you have freedom. If you are an outlaw, there's liberation, magician power, and lover intimacy, etc., etc. Next question, which of the following approaches is used if a reader critic wants to find out if names used in a story are significant? So A, sociological, B, biographical, C, psychological, D, methodological. Of course, it is methodological because names as symbol based on the archetypes which I had presented. Next question, in methodological approach, representations of characters are presented. What are these presentations called? A, archetypes, B, stereotypes, C, symbols, and D, images. Okay, so what's your answer? You are correct. It's archetypes. That's the term used by Carl Jung. It's not stereotypes, so they sound the same but it's different because when you say stereotypes, it's an oversimplified image of idea or a thing. So gaya ng Ilocano, sabi nyo kuripot, so that's stereotyping. Not all Ilocanos are misers. Okay, then symbols, images, so they are general ideas and we are looking at the term actually. So it should be archetypes. Next question, which of the following writers might be considered one of the early founders of first wave feminism? So yun ang importante, sometimes first and last. Okay, so remember this. So is it A, Virginia Woolf, B, Elaine Showalter, C, Mary Wollstonecraft, and D, Simone de Beauvoir. Okay, so all of these people are feminists. But we are looking on the first wave or the early founders of the first wave feminism. So your answer here should be Mary Wollstonecraft. O, may nagtatanong, Ma'am, the same po ba si Mary Shelley doon kay Wollstonecraft? Yes, they're the same. So, Mary Wollstonecraft, then later on Shelley, when she remarried, is an English writer and advocate of educational and social equality for women. So, ayun, Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin, di ba? Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin, and then later on Shelley. So she devised the Gothic novel, if you are familiar with Frankenstein. So we consider her as the Britain's first feminist. She was best known for her Vindication of the Rights for Women, published in 1792. So sila Virginia Woolf is a pioneer in the stream of consciousness, which is a literary device in narrative. Simone de Beauvoir is also a feminist advocate, and Elaine Showalter is the one who coined gynocriticism. So she is also a feminist. Next question, how does Virginia Woolf's essay A Room of One's Own contribute to feminist theory? Again, hula-hula na naman kayo because you haven't read A Room of One's Own. So if you still have time, you can read this or watch this. So there are videos about this. It's actually the work which was based on 2 lectures given by Woolf in the Newham College in Girton College in 1928. That's why the answer here should be letter B. It suggests that gender roles are conditioned by the possession of money and power. So during their time, nakaban yung mga writers na babae, right? It's actually letter B. It's conditioned by the possession of money and power. Next question, with which feminist theories is gynocriticism most closely associated? A. Doris Lessing, B. Monique Wittig, C. Louis Rosenblatt, and D. Elaine Showalter. Louis Rosenblatt is in the reader response criticism, then A, B, and D are all feminists. Who coined? I have mentioned that a while ago, so you are correct. It's Elaine Showalter. She coined gynocriticism. Elaine Showalter coined gynocriticism, which is a synonymous study of women as writers, and provided critics the 4 models of women's writing that help answer some of the chief concerns of the feminist criticism. Okay, another question. What does gynocriticism recommend as an approach to literature? So, gynocriticism is from feminism. A. Examining only female-authored literature more critically. B. Considering women's literature outside of historical context. C. Studying women's literature for its linguistic qualities only. And D. Becoming more familiar with the history of women and women's writing. So, I have mentioned that a while ago because Elaine Showalter coined this term gynocriticism, which is synonymous to the study of women as writers. Yes, you are correct. It's letter D. Okay, so this is it. Gynocriticism is started to emerge at the hands of Elaine Showalter. It's the study of women as writers, and it has 4 models: biological, linguistic, psychoanalytic, and cultural model. So when you are analyzing a text, you are looking at the biological model, like for example, how the author describes the different characters in the story. You are also looking at the way they talk, so the linguistic model, etc., etc. Another question, Magnificence by Estrella Alphonse shows how a mother's image becomes a protector instead of the stereotype father. What approach should be used to investigate its role? A. Reader response, B. Gender criticism, C. Biographical, and D. Psychological. Okay, so your answer is correct. It's gender criticism. Next, which approach focuses on the role of women in the text as reflected in the different kinds of society? A. Formalism, B. Psychological, C. Gender, and D. Biographical. Of course, we are talking about women, so it's gender criticism. Which of the following approaches was used to question why none of the characters in Shakespeare's play Othello ever challenged the right of a husband to murder a wife accused of adultery? It's letter C. Gender criticism, the struggle between men and women. And I have here typical questions which are asked in gynocriticism or feminism. So take a screenshot again because there are too many. Then here, so we are looking at the politics, poetics, the contribution, the experiences of these people coded in the text, and the operations, and how problematic it is. See, there are a lot of questions which you can ask in that kind of criticism or gender criticism. Okay, so I think this is the last one. So how do Marxist theories react to ideology? A, they promote ideology because it helps to create a dominant social order. B, they reject the idea that ideology has real effects on social progress. C, they subject all ideologies to critique in order to expose biased interest. D, they accept ideology as an essential, although sometimes problematic, part of society. So we are looking at the Marxism, so it's letter C, subjecting all ideologies to critique in order to expose biased interest. Marxism utilizes literature in order to analyze the economic conditions and the problems of the working class as it struggles to survive in society dominated by capitalism and its philosophy. That's why you have proletariat or the working class versus the bourgeoisie or the upper classes of the society. Next question, how does a Marxist literary critic view literature? A receptacle of symbols. B, an art which exists for its own sake. C, a product of author's view of society and the world. And D, a product of class struggles and economic history. So nabanggit ko na kanina, right? It's letter D, a product of class struggles and economic history. So that's all. I hope I had contributed to your review. Good luck on your exams. So you must have a positive mind, positive vibe so that you have a positive life, and we will welcome you to the world of teaching later on because you will be professional licensed teachers. Congratulations and magandang araw sa lahat. Salamat!